The reality of the entertainment industry today is that it's growing increasingly complex, with more content to choose from, more platforms to get it from, and more devices to watch it on. We're here today with Adrian Burton, Executive Creative Director at brand agency Lambie-Nairn, to discuss the industry evolution and the role it plays in our lives and in the context of the brands.
Morning.
Morning. What's your personal perspective on TV, Adrian?
It's a good question. I'm, to be honest, a little confused at times. I'm genuinely excited about the direction that it's taking. Maybe it's an age thing, the confusion, but I grew up in a time when, if you look at what existed in the UK on television, we had only two primary channels, BBC One and Two, quickly followed by ITV. And that was the choice. That was the choice for many years. In fact, it wasn't until 1984 when Lambie-Nairn created Channel 4, which was the first new channel in 27 years, that we were actually able to look at and see different content from a third supplier. So, the world as we know it, the television world, the broadcast world, the content world, has changed exponentially within that period, to the point at which, my kids wouldn't recognise the world that I grew up in now.
So as that's the case, is TV as you knew it dead?
I wouldn't say it was dead as much as it's just evolved, if you like. It's grown up. I think the main things that you could point to are the channel structure and whether that's now relevant anymore. Just the number of shared platforms that are out there, the ways that we consume, and the many different brands which have entered that marketplace. Our relationships with content now, I think, are much broader, and I think that's part of the conversation. Television as we knew it is very much still the box in our living room, but I think the conversation has shifted from television to the screen in its many different formats, and we consume in so many different ways now, anytime, anywhere. And beyond that, I think, if you talk about the screen, then the conversation has really shifted from television to content per se. And I think, let's just reiterate a bit of my own personal experience with that. So I'm quite old, and I'm quite happy to go home and give the linear channels their chance. The 3 or 4 we had when I grew up has now suddenly become 200, many of which, I would argue the quality in terms of their content is questionable. But I'll give them a go, but not far and in reach on many of the devices in my house are the likes of the BBC iPlayer, ITV, 4OD, and so I can always go back and I can consume according to my needs. I can search for genres, I can follow things that I'm specifically interested in, or just catch up. It might be a conversation that I may have had in the office that day which I'm just tapping into. Maybe I've missed something important. If you then compare that maybe to my wife's consumption, she's a kind of serial junkie, if you like. So she's big on that kind of genuine original content that you get from the likes of Netflix, the likes of House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, and she uses that in a way to complement the kind of things that she watches via box sets. She's a big fan of HBO. She's a big fan of AMC. So the likes of, the familiar content brands that are program brands that we've grown up with. So Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad. She likes Veep. The list is kind of endless in her world. I suppose beyond that, if we've got an occasion where we may be staying in for a quiet night, we may choose to download a film. Again, I use Amazon sometimes. I use Apple other times. It's really just who's got what in terms of what I'm searching for and what feels right on the occasion. Beyond that, if I'm having friends round for dinner, I might even dip online, watch something like Waitrose TV, looking for some culinary advice. And then if I jump to my kids, they're consuming in a completely different manner. So we're talking about YouTube. There seems to be an endless list of content now. A lot of it's user generated, sponsored links. Obviously you've got a lot of the kind of really rich third-party content generated by brands like Red Bull and GoPro. They can find what they want in their terms. A lot of it's bite-sized. It's not that they don't consume linear content. They're huge film fans, they're huge sport fans, but at the end of the day, that suits their appetite and their appetite. Well, the way that they intake content, the way they like to jump around. small bite-sized things, following conversations and building upon what they've learned in social media. You know, they're fans of all of the kind of extreme sports, of skateboarding, music promos and things. It's just the bite-sized content that they can consume en masse. I think beyond that, you know, I get BT Sport as well as part of my broadband subscription. That's great, obviously, for live sport content. And if they can't find it live, you know, I hate to say it, but they probably and doubtless have numerous different ways to find what they're looking for, legal or illegal. And that's partly just where the world now is part of that generation thing. And it's interesting as well that I still buy DVDs and Blu-rays. I started a collection and I still buy them, and I love to share them. You know, I lend them to my father. And many of the Blu-rays now come with multiple downloads as well. So my kids are away at university, so it's a great way for me to be able to send them a link. I take a quick photo on my phone, they can pick it up and they can consume as well. You know, it's up to potentially 3 downloads, so that keeps them abreast with all of the kind of latest content that I'm watching. And I think that download and access, you know, I see it myself when I travel on the train in the morning. Many people now put their newspapers and books down and are streaming live content or watching programs that they've downloaded on their mobile phones or their iPads. You know, there's loads of great bands supplying that content, the likes of HBO Go, Sky Go, Now TV. The list is literally endless. And it's just, you know, it's just changed the way we consume. It's changed our appointment to view as such. And so many different dimensions of what we're doing. And I think what's really interesting from my perspective is the brands have got a big part in that equation in helping us navigate that experience. We've all got our favourites. There are old ones and familiar ones that we still dip in. I'm still a huge fan of the BBC output, but there's lots of new stuff now, which is tempting us in many different ways. And you know, completely shifted that what was a television paradigm, I think, to now just the consumption of content on the go.
So there's an obvious challenge around navigating.
Well, I mean, that's partly why the brands are there. That's partly why we all have our favourites, whether you're a Netflix fan or you're a Sky, a fan of Sky and the channel structure that they have, or that HBO content. Yes, brands provide they're still out there. They still promise a level of quality that we all aspire to. They meet our needs, etc. But I think, as I said right at the start, you know, the channel structure seems redundant now, but actually the content is out there. The biggest challenge is, in fact, just really trying to find it now, because you haven't, or I haven't always got access to the things that I necessarily am looking for. You know, I think I'm pretty broadly covered in terms of bases, in terms of what I follow and where I go to get it, but I still haven't got immediate access to everything that I may desire.
So the way we consume content has fundamentally evolved. I mean, what's your prediction for the future?
A big question. I think formats are interesting, loyalty, and I think potentially brands. So if I start with formats, we just last year finished the project for the BBC Story of Now, which was commissioned by Touchcast. On the BBC's behalf. I mean, that was a hugely exciting and innovative project. People have been putting video online since almost day one of the internet, bandwidths permitting. But I think the idea of putting internet now and embedding that within video opens up the opportunity for a distinct and very different experience. You know, if you look at the way that particularly I think the younger generation's minds are being rewired by technology. The whole Touchcast experience it's non-linear, it's interactive, it demands participation. So that from that degree, it's an active experience, not a passive experience. It's something which you can dive more deeply into a particular subject, or you can just shallow dive. In many ways, what the Touchcast platform promises is you know, an experience which is akin to the internet and the way that we surf the internet. And it's just, for me, it's just an interesting format and shift in formats. And I think there'll be many more experimental formats of that nature. And I think that's obviously a good thing. You know, it taps into our desire to learn and innovate and you know, just challenge the way that we consume in the broadest sense.
So in this ever-changing landscape, where is it you feel loyalty sits?
I mean, loyalty for me is a difficult one. I think I don't disagree with the idea that content is king, if you like. But actually, I think, if you listen to the broadcasters and networks, I'm sure they'd say context is everything, because they're the people you're choosing to consume it through, and therefore the people who are benefiting from subscriptions and the fees that you pay. I think, based on that content theory, to my mind, I think there is a role for a much broader platform. I'm thinking of the likes of what Google did for search, or Wikipedia did for information, and what Spotify's recently done for music. There are lots of those big aggregators out there, and I'd like a simpler life. I'd like a life that's more one-dimensional. I'd like a life where actually there is a platform out there that gets to know me, that's intelligent enough, that's personalised for me, that's customisable enough, but actually just opens up that world of content in one place. And I think that's the big kind of issue here at the moment. If you go back to the brands, I think there are too many within the space. I think there's going to be winners and losers, and I can't say I've done the maths on it or anything like that, but I do think there is a role for a universal global platform which will bring all of that content together. And I think the outcome of that will be, when we're all looking at the same things, there's no room for lack of quality. I think what you get is quality will bubble to the surface. It might be a reduced programming format eventually, as against a lot of the stuff that's just generally generated out there. But if we want quality and we want simplicity, I think that's the kind of vehicle that we need at the moment.
And what does all this mean in terms of brands?
Well, I mean, brands are my bread and butter, so I mean they're obviously important. But in terms of brands, I think all brands need to start with the screen. I'm not just talking about broadcast, but I think the days of the page are gone. And if you think about that, how brands used to manifest in 2 dimensions, I think the idea of a 3-dimensional stage, something that broadcast brands are of course very familiar with, is the kind of key at the moment. I think brands need to be dynamic. The way that we interact with them, I think participation of course is key. Those brands which can reach out and build relationships, connect with us emotionally, that are playful, participatory, interactive, and built with the experience in mind. I think you're talking about content brands which can become much richer. It's not just about broadcasting content and housing content, but it's the backstory, it's elaborating on that, and it's creating big content experiences for brands, which is ultimately, I think, probably very important. I think brands also need to grow up a little bit. They need to be more flexible. I think, there's a big conversation in the past about consistency. I'd advocate more coherency now. It's about reflecting the audiences that you're talking to and connecting with them in their terms. So customizable, intelligent, it's that kind of space that we're living in, and I think brands have got a role to do in fulfilling that. I think the important thing about this space, of course, is there are lots of great brands out there, but I just can't see them all surviving. We look at our high streets and the brands of yesterday have gone, and I think in the same way that the traditional broadcast brands have grown up and evolved, and we've lost some along the way, I think we'll continue to see that. But I think brand is ultimately important. It's the shorthand by which we reference, if you like, our preferences. And I'm not just talking about networks or platforms, but I'm talking about program brands as well. I'm not a fan of it, but if you are a fan of Top Gear, that's the way that you will find that content in the future. So it's become a very powerful brand in its own right, even though it's a piece of broadcast content. So I think building upon that storytelling, that's what's going to help us navigate and hopefully provide what is a dynamic but more personal and therefore simpler experience.
Adrian Burton, thank you for your time.
Thank you.